Security leak from a cult. Like many people, I decided to see what was on the dark web and see what was actually on there. I watched some videos and some guides on how to do it safely. I heard rumors of people getting their computers hacked and messed with. Not to mention some other people have had far worse fates happen to them. It was difficult to determine which of these stories were fact and which were fiction. I guess people who frequented the dark web would have been more aware about what was going on. I used one of my older laptops that I didn't care about if it got damaged. I wiped all the personal info and files that could cause issues if someone got their hands on it. I guess if something ended up messing with the laptop, I would just have an old, outdated paperweight that I could easily get rid of and forget about. I downloaded the Tor browser, and the thing I hated the most was how slow it was. I nearly lost interest with that alone. A lot of the sites wouldn't load, and when they did, they weren't all that great to look at. Most of them looked so damn old, and I was left feeling so underwhelmed. I was reminded of sites I saw from the 90s. I saw so many videos on YouTube about the dark web, and I was feeling quite frustrated about it. It was so boring. I didn't know what I was looking for specifically. I heard some people had stumbled on some absolutely vile content, and I didn't want to do that. I wasn't really interested in drugs or anything. I wanted to see weird but mostly harmless things. I guess I could have done that on the surface web. Cults have always been fascinating to me. I was curious about the different cults and things. I love checking out this sort of thing. Guilty pleasure and all of that. After clicking on several dead links, I found one that looked pretty good. I don't know if I should name the site, especially with what they know about me, but everyone on the page was smiling. It was probably a generic stock image. They spoke of happiness, a world without money, or the stress of a 9-to-5 job, where everyone was equal and treated well. All things that should be the case, but unfortunately they were usually wrapped up with one psycho or another. I kept scrolling. The site looked like it was made in the early 2000s. It was gaudy and slow, and it being on the dark web didn't help either. I hate to say it, but part of me wants to know more about the cult. Who they were, how they managed to get members. Why did they post it on the dark web instead? I have never heard of them before, so I thought maybe I could just Google them. But when I searched them, I found absolutely nothing. There was always a chance it was a prank played by some teenager, wanting to get a rise out of people. I pondered making a YouTube video on it, maybe a series, maybe a way to earn some money in the future. So I used my phone to record and document what I was finding. I used a Proton email account to avoid using my real one, and told them I had some questions. I didn't know why I was doing this. Over time, checking the site and seeing if there were any updates became an addiction. It was like living a double life. On one hand, I was a devout member of this cult, reading and learning about the teachings, and learning more about the members, especially the leader. While on the other hand, I was going to school and living a normal life. One of my friends asked about what I was doing and went into vivid details about it. We laughed a lot about it. In one of the emails I received my next learning instructions, I wasn't surprised by it. It was the same talk of, help us grow, brother, repent, acknowledge the divine leader, and that sort of thing. The topics of the emails blurred into each other by this point. They all sounded the same. But this time, at the end, it was signed with my name, and not the alias I used when I contacted the site. I decided that was enough snooping on these sites, and the dark web. Every so often, I will receive an email from the cult. They mention something small about me, and after a month, I decided to let the email die. I don't want to deal with it anymore. I'm scared at some point the cult will try to reach out to me in the real world. So far, nothing has happened, and I'm worried they'll contact all the people in my real life. Please, does anyone have any advice for me? Human Meat Part 2. Sent in by Anonymous. This story is related to one you've told in the past. You could see it as a continuation or addition to it. I'm not the author of the story, but I've had a similar experience. The story in question, and the one you mentioned I think back in your first dark web video, about the kids who ended up on the human meat shop. If any of you don't recall the story, first off, you should go and listen to the video. But it was about a group of kids that were messing around on the dark web, and ended up on a butchery site that listed human meat, and explained how to properly prepare it, advertised their special seasoning, and gave all the information about the specific human cuts. They also touted that they sourced on demand, meaning that they had the ability to get the meat when you requested it, so they had it on standby, and they would kill and cut it when you wanted it. Think of it like Wendy's fresh, never frozen promise, but for cannibals. Yeah, it was legitimately some creepy stuff. And what's even worse, it's legitimate. I can actually vouch for the legitimacy of the human meat market. I don't know about the exact page they were on. It could have been a honeypot. Who knows? But there are a handful of pages you can actually work with to get human cuts. I have actually spoken with people that claim to have eaten human meat, and they've told me it tastes close to veal, but depending on the person's fitness level, can also taste closer to pork. I don't know about you, but that thought makes me gag and want to become a vegan. That said, I actually had a bit of a story about another dark web site that was similar, but took it a bit further in their intentions. I'm not going to name the page. I don't want your listeners going out there and becoming man-eaters. Plus, it is super illegal to buy human meat. Duh. But there was, and probably is still, a dark website out there that is dedicated to cannibalism. But they see it more as a religious experience than anything. You heard it right. They see the practice of cannibalism as a religious experience. This group of people on this page firmly believe they are loving thy neighbor isn't enough. You should also gnaw on their shins with a bit of sweet baby rays. Sorry, bad joke. Humor aside, I'm being completely serious. This site was built by a group of people, a cult if you will, that held the firm belief that the ultimate act a human could perform to get closer to God was to consume their fellow man. Their ethos basically stated that eating human meat caused a change in your biology, and would make you more than human. It said something about how it was basically the way to climb up the food chain, and that the only thing above humans were gods. Thus, being more than human made you godlike. I remember reading a lot of the information on the site, and thinking, wow, these people are completely and totally insane. But they definitely held tight to their own beliefs, and didn't shy away from what they thought. Like I said, this was pretty obviously a cult, and it used all the expected cult language, pushing you to become more than what you are, talking about how their leader was given this message from God himself, and trying to gather more members through positive reinforcement of their ideology. They had a section where you could sign up for a meeting to come and see what their group was about, which to me felt like a method of getting more victims. But maybe they were legitimately recruiting people. Much like the other page, they had all the basics. How to prepare the meat, what flavors went best with which parts, how to safely eat your human meat, which is an interesting thought. There was even an entire section of the page dedicated to their members and their rankings, their favorite activities. It was honestly like an icebreaker page that was made to show you that everyday people were also willing to eat other everyday people. Overall, it was a 10 out of 10 on my what the fuck meter, and if I ever disappear after sending the story, you'll know what happened. I'll just hope they pair me with a nice salad to balance out the meal.
I like to dabble in the dark web every once in a while, mostly for entertainment purposes, but I also like to, well, I'll put it straight, I like to purchase things that are not legal. There are certain things that I purchase that the police would not be proud of. Nothing that's disgusting or anything like that, but I have personal issues that certain substances have helped me with in the past. I'm not proud. I should stop, but I'm not here to talk about my personal habits or be part of an intervention. I'm writing this to tell you about what terrible things I have found on the dark web personally. Now, who am I? Well, I'm in my late 20s, and I'm what one would consider a professional hacker. For the most part, I'm a white hat. I do what I do professionally and within the confines of the law. I used to work for a pretty large corporation as part of their security team. But I've since gone on to be a contractor, and now I just hack away at sites and apps that companies want tested. The technical term is penetration tester, but the layman term is just a good guy hacker. That's not to say that I haven't done my fair share of illegal hacking, accessing systems that I'm not supposed to, getting into databases that should be protected, and shutting down certain people that I didn't care for, and many more. I've never stolen data or sold it or anything, but I've gotten into some fairly sensitive servers in the past. Now, the dark web is a lot harder to hack, so to speak. You need to know how to get to the server. You need to be able to remotely access the said server, and so forth and so on. Because these servers aren't indexed, it's pretty damn hard, and the main way to get into them is to find a vulnerability in an onion site. Again, not an easy task. I mean, come on, these people are on the dark web. They know what they're doing is seriously illegal. They aren't going to operate with a flimsy system most of the time. Walking back to my statement about how I have, and sometimes still do, purchase illegal things on the dark web. There are quite a few marketplaces that exist out there. You all know about the big ones that have just shut down, like Silk Road, but that was just the tip of the iceberg, and they got shut down because they got cocky. I have never worked with any of the big name markets. I like to keep to the little guys, mostly because they're less likely to be compromised. One of the marketplaces that I use ended up going offline, and based on their own statements, because they assumed that they had a snake that was sneaking around, or basically, law enforcement was trying to get into their systems or was compromising their network, hacking them, again, in layman terms. Well, that snake was me. Except, I wasn't doing what I was doing to give information to the cops or anything. I just ended up finding a hole in their security and then exploiting it. I was able to get into their local network, I was able to get into their customer databases, and I was able to actually get into their mail server. You may be listening to this and thinking, okay, so what? Why is this guy bragging about getting into their network and saying it's a scary story? Well, I'm getting there, slowly. The first point to make is that I said customer databases, which, if you think about it, is a problem. These guys were on the dark web and were selling illegal substances for cryptocurrencies. Why did they have a customer data? Why did they have names, addresses, and delivery instructions saved on a network for their dark web service? Well, my good friend, what you may not think about is the fact that these people dealing in illegal sales want leverage over you, and those like you. And while they say that they don't have your information, a lot of them do. They save that data, and they will use it to lessen their sentences if caught, or they will legitimately just sell you out if they think that you're a problem. I'm only adding this in to be a deterrent to those of you that think you'll go out to some dark market and buy drugs or weapons. They save your data, they know who you are, and they will use it if they think it will benefit them. Now, the real scary part of what I found was in their mail server. These messages were routed pretty much internally. There was no external traffic, and these were set up so that only the two people in the communication could ever touch or see the message, unless you actually got into their internal server and subsequently into one of the accounts. The first few messages weren't that interesting. They were just about business dealings. They mentioned that there were people that they wanted to get off the service. They were even talking about compromising another marketplace. And it wasn't until I got into one of their conversations, marked as synthetic testing, and that stuff got freaky. The first message explained that they had a new product that was being lab synthesized, but they didn't know if it was any good, or if there was anything negative about it. The response basically said, "Screw it, sell it anyway." The first sender stated that they didn't want to sell it to the normal clientele as it may harm their reputation and thus their sales if it wasn't a good product. They then asked the second person to find a test subject and followed that up with, "Find someone young and healthy, preferably someone in their teens. I think that way we can get the best results. Less likely to be tracked. Do you still have your connection?" He said he did, and that he could have 2 or 3, and in his words, children, lined up and ready to go within a week. These guys were seriously going to be testing drugs, lab-synthesized drugs on children and teens to see if they were any good. And the more that I dug into it, the worse it got. There were conversations for this. There were conversations about weapon transfers, and there was even an entire chain that claimed that they had a potential in with a company that developed medication, and that they may be supplying their subjects to test new, still being researched, medications for a company in another country. Basically, underground testing for non-FDA approved medications. Unfortunately, I didn't have any way to pull the information from the server, and I didn't have the ability to save it locally, so there wasn't a whole lot that I could do without incriminating myself. I ended up documenting information by hand as best as I could, and I went to submit an anonymous tip. By the time that I went to do so, they had gone offline, and apparently, while I had gotten in, and I was properly secured, my access was logged, so they knew that someone had seen their information. My guess is that this set off alarms, and they moved on to another network, location, onion linked, and etc. I wish I could say that I learned a thing or two from this, but I'm a stubborn idiot, and I still do business on the dark web. The only thing I learned was that I don't personally want to know what the hell goes on out there. Not anymore than what I personally need.
I found my enemy on the dark web. My friends have recently gotten into browsing the dark web. It's fun to log on and see what was on there. We didn't really stumble on anything that was too weird. Not at the start, anyway. We wanted to track down some friends we lost touch with. The usual places didn't work. Facebook, Insta, etc. Nothing. We looked up their family members to try to find some clues. We felt like we were spies or something. It was amazing. We eventually found a site that was blank, except for a search text square. Above it, it said to enter any piece of information you had about the person, and it would dig more up. we didn't want to potentially endanger a friend or something. So we put in the old high school bully's name. It was typed in and then we pressed enter. It was searching and it was pretty slow too. While we waited, we laughed and gossiped about how we imagined her looking now. After a few minutes, the results came up and we were shocked at what we managed to find. We found some old phone numbers for her, some pictures of her throughout the years, and we took pleasure in knowing that they had not been kind. We laughed and kept scrolling. It turned out she had a really rough couple of years. She put on a lot of weight and we were being such toxic assholes. We kept scrolling until we saw something we hated. There was a newspaper report that said she had been murdered. It changed the mood of the room, and instantly, we regretted how shitty we had been moments before. We kept scrolling, and found pictures of her autopsy. It was gruesome seeing the process, and we stared dumbly at the screen. What the F did we stumble on? We kept scrolling and came to a video of her being strangled to death. She was kicking and screaming, trying to pull the electrical cords from around her neck while the masked man strangled her. She choked, her face went blue, and finally, she went still. Did we just watch a snuff video? We hoped this was all fake, but it didn't look fake. We were all silent as we stared at the screen. It ruined the jokes and we felt wrong being able to see that. No one should have been able to see that. We clicked away, all too ashamed to look at each other. We decided to search for her on the surface web, Google, that sort of thing. There were reports she had been murdered and where her body had been found. The murderer still hasn't been caught.
Some people have a normal job, Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week, with health benefits, bonuses each year, retirement funds. Well, not me. I don't have a normal job. It's not easy doing what I do, but it pays the bills since I can't get a regular job due to my criminal record. I'm a janitor that works for the dark web, and I clean up murder rooms once the buyers are done torturing and killing the victims that they paid for. I've been doing it for the past 3 years, and every time someone needs help cleaning up the bloody mess they made, I go in and then clean up. I make sure that there is not a single drop of blood in the room and dispose of the leftover body parts any way that I could. No evidence remaining, no questions asked. In fact, I can never ask any questions. These people cannot be messed with. I just get paid to do my job and go home like nothing. It's a sick job, really, but they would pay me very good. But all of that would change one night when I started to finally question my morality. It was one night when they called me to do a job. It's always at the same location, which is 40 miles from where I live in a rundown warehouse. I was called to clean up a room, which really was no problem at all. But I noticed or barely caught on to something that I never thought twice about. As I was cleaning the room that was covered in blood, I saw a small picture on the floor. I picked it up, and it was a picture of a little girl, probably around 14 years old. This made me think right away that this was probably the victim, whose blood I was cleaning up just now, and it gave me an uneasy feeling inside, and for the first time, kind of disturbed me, just for the fact that these people are now using kids as their victims. But again, this was a job where no questions are asked, and I put the picture in my pants pocket and continued cleaning. Once I was done, I packed up my things and quickly got out of the warehouse. I went inside my car and instantly I got a call. It was them. They always call private, and I answered and they asked me if I was done cleaning up. I told them yes and that I had just gotten into my car. Then they told me that they left the money inside my glove compartment while I was inside cleaning, and they'll probably have another job for me in the next 2 days since they have a customer who's already waiting. I knew that I shouldn't have done this, but I decided to ask how old was she. Well, referring to the victim. They hanged up the call. I'm sure they were pissed just with me asking. I didn't know if I could continue doing this type of jobs anymore, but I didn't know how else I would get out of this without some possible threat to my life. I got the picture of the little girl and put it resting on the passenger side, and I went home that night contemplating everything. It was the next day at around 9 o'clock at night when I got a private call. I knew it was them and I was tempted not to answer, but I did anyway. They gave me the same location again and to be there at around 4 a.m. This time, no questions asked. Juan Miguel Santos of 3905 North 16th Street. Then the call hung up. This was a clear threat. Just do my job and get out of there, and I would need to leave town the next morning and disappear after this. I arrived at the location and saw that there was an old Grand Marquis parked outside. Usually, there wouldn't be any cars but mine at the location, and I got worried that maybe these people are keeping a close eye on me. I stepped outside my car and walked slowly inside, feeling more and more paranoid with each step that I took. The hallways were darker than before, and I saw light come from the room that I was supposed to go in. I entered inside, and my eyes couldn't believe what they had just seen. There was a girl in the middle of the room tied up and gagged to a chair, alive. The job wasn't done yet, but then I saw the body of a man laying right on the floor next to the girl that looked to be around 16 years old. The girl began to scream at me, and I started freaking out even more. I ran to the man on the floor and checked his pulse. He was gone. This was the man that was going to kill this girl, since I saw a scalpel on his right hand. I walked myself outside into the hallway and immediately got a call. Private, it was them. Is everything okay? They knew something was up. They also had cameras in the hallways, but not in the rooms, and they must have seen that I was nervous. Yes, everything's okay. Finish the job and get out. We'll leave the money in your car. They hanged up, but I knew they knew something was wrong. I went back inside the room and the girl was yelling at me to help her with a gag in her mouth. I didn't know what to do, and I needed to dispose of her body. That meant that I needed to kill her first. I looked around inside the man's bag, and he had several weapons and tools inside, presumably to use to torture the girl. I pulled out a power drill and turned it on, and the girl started to scream even more, telling me to stop. She was crying her eyes out. I aimed the power drill at her face, and more tears started to run down her face, and I put the power drill down. I couldn't do it. I took off her gag and asked what had happened, and she told me that the man just fell on the floor and seemed like he had a heart attack. You know that I can't let you out of here. These are dangerous people, and there are cameras everywhere inside this building. We both looked around the room. What about him? Asked the girl. I looked at the man and saw he had a hoodie. I took it off and gave it to the girl. I said, "Put this on and cover yourself and run as far as you can away from here." I'm scared. What if they find me? The girl said. I looked inside the man's pockets and found some car keys. They must have been for the car that was parked outside. Here, take these keys. I think the car that's parked outside belongs to him. But whatever you do not go to the police. They will find you and they will kill you. Just go as far away from here as possible." And before she left, I asked for her name and she said it was Crystal and that she was 17 years old. I was scared for her. I knew they might have even been outside waiting for me to finish. As soon as I was to take off, a car was approaching from behind me. The car parked right behind me and two men in masks stepped out. Not only that, but they had opened the back seat of the car and took out Crystal. They caught her. They knew everything we had done, and I should have taken off. One of the men took out a gun and pointed it at me to step outside of my vehicle. I stepped out, and they wanted for me to go inside. They took me and Crystal into the room with the client's dead body. I knew what they were going to do to us, and Crystal couldn't stop whining and moping. This is what happens when you try to be a hero. I needed to do something before we would be dead bodies right next to the one that's already on the floor, and I saw that Crystal was right beside the switch to the lights. And I looked at her and signaled my eyes to the switches to turn them off. The moment Crystal turned off the lights, I ran towards one of the masked men. Gunshots fired as the men were yelling to turn on the lights, and I grabbed the power drill that was on the floor and drilled it right into the man's chest. I stuck the drill all the way in, and I didn't stop till I heard the man gurgling and choking from his own blood. I got off of him and heard Crystal breathing hard and yelling. I turned on the lights and witnessed Crystal stabbing the other masked man repeatedly with a scalpel in his face. Half of his mask was gone from the punctures, and I got Crystal and then told her to stop. She was frightened, terrified. She hugged me tight and began to cry. Both of us had made it out alive this time. We walked over to my car and took off, both of us covered in blood. The sun was coming out, as it was already 6:30 in the morning. We both needed to change our identities, and I knew a guy who could do it, that I met from jail, and I drove over to his place right away. Sometimes, I do think that maybe it would have been better if both of us were dead, since we would now have to live in fear for the rest of our lives. Luckily, I haven't heard or seen of anything, but you never know. These people always manage to find you. Let's hope they don't catch me now, or for the rest of my life.
Ron was almost murdered. This story isn't mine personally. I'm not the type of person to go on the deep web for any reason. This story actually happened to a co-worker and a good friend of mine. I made sure he was okay with me submitting the story, and he said it was fine. For the sake of privacy and security, we're going to refer to him as Ron. Ron's a good guy, probably one of the nicest people I ever met, and he really didn't deserve the situation that happened to him. I will say I've known him for several years now, and I completely believe everything he's told me about this. Several years ago, Ron lived in a comfortable suburban home with his lovely wife of 10 years. And for the sake of security, we're going to call her Karen. Ron and Karen had a 7-year-old daughter at the time of this story, and everything seemed alright. Ron had a good job and made more money than they actually needed. Karen was a stay-at-home mom that took care of their daughter when she was home, and ran the various errands while she was at school, pretty much doing the basics of what a stay-at-home parent does. Ron was under the impression that their marriage was in a good position. He loved Karen as much as he always had. He loved his daughter more than life itself. They had a nice house in a nice neighborhood, and they had enough money to take care of any financial emergencies if they needed it. To the best of Ron's knowledge, they were all happy and healthy. He didn't think anything was wrong at home. Karen, on the other hand, was apparently very unhappy with their marriage, and was determined to leave Ron and run off with some guy she had met online and had been talking to for around a year. Karen and her internet boyfriend apparently spent a lot of time plotting, and spoke extensively how they were going to follow through on what they had planned, and what would be the best way to get the deed done. At one time, they even discussed the possibility of internet boyfriend driving from his home in Nebraska and doing it himself, saying he could make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Apparently this would have been too personal, and they opted to look on the dark web for someone to remove her husband from the equation. Then, she would wait long enough to bury him, collect insurance, and pretend to grieve. After a few months, she planned to then take her daughter and the money from his life insurance and run off with the boyfriend to start a new life up north. Based on the conversations, she was adamant it needed to look like an accident. That way the life insurance would pay out the maximum. Like I said, Ron made good money and was worth a decent amount dead, so she planned to live a few years off that with the new guy. Back to their actual plan. As I said, they had the intent of going on the dark web and finding, basically, a hitman to get rid of her husband. Apparently, they were successful to an extent. They got on the deep web, they found a site that listed people providing these services, and they got the information for someone they were going to pay to do the entire thing. They even went as far as sending the $15,000 to the account of the person who's supposed to do the job. Thankfully, for Ron, his wife and her new boyfriend were not well versed on how things worked on the dark web, and to some extent, were kind of stupid. Apparently, they went all the way through plotting with this person, sent him the money and even set a date. On the date in question, Karen had taken their daughter to her grandparents' house and had told Ron that she was going to spend the day with them. While she was gone, Ron got a visit by the local police and a federal agent. They explained the situation to him and basically took him into protective custody. When Karen got home, she expected to find her husband lying dead on the living room floor, but instead had federal agents screaming at her and taking her to the ground. What's worse, she apparently had brought their daughter home with her, meaning she would have been okay with the little girl seeing her dead father. Based on what Ron was told, the police had all of the information on the conversation, connection logs from when she was on the page, emails from her to the fake hitman, and enough evidence to put her away for a long time. Apparently, she was so desperate to get rid of him, she literally sent $15,000 on a credit card over PayPal to have her husband murdered. I don't know if she was just ignorant, or if she just wanted it done and wasn't going to question the situation. Thankfully, for Ron's sake, she had gotten a hold of a sting on the site, and she was taken down without issue. The boyfriend was also arrested, and they were charged for conspiracy to commit murder, and probably a few other charges, but they were both sentenced to 20 years in prison for their plans. Ron has since remarried, and his daughter is old enough to understand what her mother did. But he says he got lucky with this, and I agree. If his wife had gone to another page, been a little more competent, and paid a little more attention to being secure in her messaging and communications, Ron may have been legitimately murdered that day, and she'll be off living with her internet boyfriend in the Dakotas. I hope you enjoy these stories. Also, apologies if my voice was ever croaky. I'm still getting over a cold or something. I was joined by my BB, Miss Creepy Tales. If you enjoyed her narrations, her links are down below. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreons, subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Check out my social media and my merch store available in the links below. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and stab the like button. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.